Andrew, I just want to welcome you. You have a master's of business arts. You're a husband, a father, a retired Special Forces Green Beret, a Warrior Angels Foundation co-founder, and the best-selling co-author of Tales from the Blast Factory, a brain-injured Special Forces Green Berets journal back from the Brink. Now, this book has been turned into an award-winning full-feature documentary titled Quiet Explosions, Healing the Brain by Emmy and Academy Award winners. Andrew lives with his wife, Becky, the love of his life, and their 7 children in the Houston area. I'm super stoked to have you on here for today's special interview. And Andy, I just want you to share your story with our listeners, just professionally and, not professionally, if you can.
Yeah, well, it's an absolute honor of mine to be on the show, David. And, you just want to jump right into it, give it some context and go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Go ahead and share your story.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, my story, well, I guess we can start where I grew up in Texas. Football was king and still is king, I would think, although I don't really follow it that much anymore. But so my entire life revolved around being an athlete. By 10 years old was the first time I ever played organized, football in pads. And it was just like something was awakened in me, and it became apparent like that was the driving factor and motivator in my life. So pursued football, was able to play it, through high school at a high level. In Texas, we were 2-time state champions. I was highly recruited, went on to be a scholarship collegiate athlete, started all 4 years, offensive line, did very well academically, and got to the end of that and realized that there wasn't going to be a professional career in the NFL there. Had the opportunity to play some arena football, but it just wasn't appealing to me. I had a bunch of friends who were playing kind of in that arena. And I was like, man, like we're just continuing to thrash our bodies, but for not the benefit of any, good pay. So like at that point, it just became less appealing to me. But, I was kind of left with a little bit of this void. Like, what am I supposed to do with my life now? Because I never thought, but beyond that, like, I will just pursue this, till forever. And there was never any thinking. That's the young man's game. And, 9/11 kicks off in 2001. That's right around the time I'm in college. And I felt very compelled by what was going on, simply for the fact that there was guys my own age, as I knew it, were putting their lives on the line for the benefit of the country. That's how I saw it. And at the same time, though, I was pursuing what I wanted to be pursuing, but it was always sometimes in the forefront, sometimes in the back, but it was always there. And so it became, at that point, a very easy transition when my college career ended to say, okay, well, the next logical progression for me is to jump in the military. And, I know I wanted to be in a special operations unit. So I did my best to educate myself on, the different ones. And I thought like, hey, Army Special Forces Green Beret sounds like something that would be good for my personality type. By this time I had a college degree, I had a little bit of life experience, was athletic, could think critically and independently. And that seemed to line up well as I understood the mission of Green Beret Special Forces. Guys a little bit more mature, going to be out dealing in austere environments, essentially force multiplying foreign, foreign military units to work by, with, and through, usually to overtake governments or to put in a regime that we deem as better than the one in place. So, that was kind of that transition year. So, football from 10 all the way through senior in college. I graduated college August of 2006. I enlisted in the Army in October of 2006. And my parents were like, why on earth would you enlist? You just finished a college degree. My brother went through a ROTC program, and that's where you directly commission as an officer into the military when you're done. So like, why don't you follow in the footsteps of your brother? But I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to test myself in combat. I wanted to be on the ground where the shit was happening. And I didn't want to just do 18 months and then go back to, a job at a desk.
Yeah.
So it was a no-brainer for me. So that's what kind of segued me into the military and the kind of special operations pipeline. So I'll kind of stop there, David, and see any questions or where we want to go next.
Yeah, well, the reason why I brought you on here, Andy, is because I saw an episode that you did with Joe Rogan, okay? And he was talking about TBI and post-traumatic stress disorder. Can you go ahead and elaborate on PTSD and TBI and kind of what's the difference between them?
Yeah, I think to give some more context to that. So my job in Special Forces, one of my responsibilities was an explosive breacher. So I was in very close proximity to a number of explosive blast waves, both ones that I initiated and a lot that I did not initiate. And the fallout from that, basically 10 years of doing that, and without a scratch on my body, without missing a limb or an eye, I started to become plagued with all these new physical and psychological issues that I had never had any problems with, any experience with in my entire life up until that point. And so that for me as an individual was very bizarre. I was only knocked out in my entire career once, and it was brief, and it was during my last combat rotation, which was in 2013. So again, we're talking like 3 to 5 seconds, and that's it for my entire life. And I didn't even put 2 and 2 together. I was like, just go back and do business, and we kept operating, no big deal. But being on those receiving end of just hundreds to thousands of low-level blasts over a course of career, we now know is pretty detrimental to the brain, because it adds up this cumulative effect over time, these subconcussive blasts that really degrade the continuity of the brain. And how that manifests is all these different downstream issues. Like for me, it was headaches that went into migraine headaches, that went into blurry vision, that went into double vision, that went into constant balance issues, and then started to have, psychological issues, being plagued by anxiety and panic attacks and depression and bouts of just uncontrollable rage, bouts of crying without having any reason to be in that emotional state, and having no control over what triggered that, or to stop it once it came on. I was kind of a prisoner in my own body, watching this thing play out. And then on top of that, I started to lose my, I would say my neurological functioning, like my ability to make executive decisions, to make good decisions, to recall words, working short-term memory, things like that started to completely evaporate. All this happened in a very short time period. So going back to me and the question that you asked about what is TBI, what is post-traumatic stress, and maybe what is the difference? And there's also there's overarching spheres of influence where they're overlapping in the symptomatology. A traumatic brain injury, when you get down to it, is all alteration of brain functioning and brain chemistry. And that can mean a lot of different things. That's like, I forgot where I'm at. You don't have to be knocked out for this to happen. So, but seeing stars or light, or being dizzy, a period of not remembering what happened slightly before it or slightly right after it. And it does not have to be this well thought out thing like, oh, somebody's in a coma, they're knocked out, they have a open head wound, things of that nature, because I never was had any of those, in my experience. Now, post-traumatic stress, the Department of Defense's definition, in essence, is an individual who either experiences or witnesses a traumatic event. And then that is replayed kind of on an auto loop mentally, kind of keeping their body in that fight or flight state. And it's accompanied by a whole nother list of symptoms and symptomatology that's really degrading to the individual. And the theory is that one is physiological, one is physical, and the other one is just psychological, meaning there's psychological duress or distress that results in the human not being able to cope with that, and having to go through all different kinds of coping mechanisms with this, in this new induced state of anxiety, so to speak. So, that's kind of the textbook definitions of, what is a traumatic brain injury, what is the terminology or the definition of post-traumatic stress.
Yes, Andrew, going back to that podcast that I heard you on with Joe. Okay. I'm going to quote you. Okay. You said that in that podcast, you said that you're trying to get back to the man you were pre-injury status. Okay. What really caught my attention was the fact that once you had lost your identity as an operator in the Special Forces, due to the TBI injury, that you told yourself, I am still a husband, I am still a father, and that was the catalyst for change. Can you expand on that epiphany that you had?
Yeah, I think we all get wrapped up, especially us as men, about what it is that we do. That was my entire identity, my entire life. I was an athlete, and then I was a Special Forces operator. Anything secondary to that was much lower. Secondary is not even a correct term. It was just down here because those were the most important things. And my family and my children were of the utmost importance to me. But in my mindset, which is an accurate way that I had to deal with it, everything that we were doing there was life and death. And that means they took way in the back seat. It wasn't a lack of love. That's just the state. That's just the fact of where it was. If I could go back, I would do it better. But that's the thing. So, man, I had to do a lot of soul searching because you're in this position where basically the Army came back and said, hey, Andrew, you can't take another blow to the head. We don't know what it's going to do to you. You can no longer operate, which I couldn't anyway in the state that I was in. So I'm having all these physical problems. I'm having all these psychological problems. My life is out of control. I can no longer do and perform. I'm not the man who I was when I came into the Army, and I have no understanding how that even happened. So I'm having this internal fight, this internal struggle about, well, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
Everything's been taken from me. People are treating me wrongly. No one understands me. I'm not going to be able to do what I thought I was supposed to be able to do. And I got in this really negative mind space. And I mean, sometimes we have to have a wake-up call to wake up. And mine came that you were quoting there next to my son's bedside after he had this life-threatening illness. And he had this serious surgery to remove this massive mass out of his neck. And that's where I just came to that conclusion that, like, hey, man, I might not have that anymore, but that's not me. That's not who the essence of who I am is. And you can always take that away. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters are the people who look up to me and rely on me and who need me to navigate life. And it became crystal clear at that point, like, okay, I'm not a Special Forces operator anymore. So be it. Out of my control. But what is under my control is the man that I want to be. And so how do I get from who I am today to where I want to be? And I started thinking differently. And then I said, okay, well, if I was the man who I wanted to be, how would I treat my wife? How would I treat my children? And how would I go about doing the things that I want to do? So everything every action I make, every way I communicate is in perfect alignment with who I want to be, which is always guiding them and supporting them to the absolute best of my ability, man. So that was that, like, profound awakening there at my son's bedside where I realized, like, you know what, I got to go all in. I'm going all in. I'm going all in on my family. And let's start with that first. That and getting better, returning to the man in my pre-injury status. And then the third one was, hey, man, if we can do these two things, I'm going to turn around and figure out how we can help people who are on the exact same condition that I was in and that my family was in, because it didn't seem like the answers and the information that we've put out over the last 5 years, it didn't really exist in 2014 and 2015 to the extent it does now, man. So that's the importance of us realizing our roles as men, as husbands, as fathers, first and foremost, and coming back to that foundation and then working out from there. And like I said, man, sometimes we need a wake-up call to wake up. And that was certainly my case.
Man, that's so awesome that you said that, because your story resonates with a lot of men, even men who didn't serve in the military, you know what I mean? Whether it be an athlete or a professional boxer or whatever, you know what I mean? I know so many men who are suffering with these underlying issues, You know, take, for example, one of our mutual friends, Gene Glaudman from Line 11, right?
Right.
He deals with a lot of apprentices and stuff like that through the trade over there. And we've been seeing a lot of men just committing suicide over, you know, just issues that you'd never think would plague them. You know, a lot of them have to do with their children, you know, not having custody, not being able to see them. But I mean, just guys who are dealing with these issues that are underlying, you know what I mean? There's a deeper issue there, and it's coming out in this traumatic stress that they have, you know, and like you said, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder isn't just set to people who have been in war or anything like that, right? It could happen through childhood, you know, and that's one of the reasons why we're bringing this awareness on this topic, is because I had read an article, okay, Andy, and this article talked about how fathers with PTSD were coming back and they were actually giving PTSD. They're somehow passing it, right, through negative traits and acts and responses. These fathers who are suffering from this untreated PTSD or TBI issues could have negative impacts on their children. Okay. It's not that the fathers can somehow pass along their nightmares or flashbacks to their kids, but you know, it explains that rather specific PTSD symptoms can alter specific parenting behaviors, which can in turn shape a child's behavior. You know, and I thought that was amazing. It was written by Susanna Creech, who's a clinical psychologist and associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin. You know what I mean? So, you know, I just thought that it was pretty awesome to bring you on here and be able to share everything that you went through and your thoughts on all these things, and linking PTSD with fatherhood, you know? So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Andy, is how has TBI or PTSD affected your ability to be an effective father, if it has?
Yeah. You know, there's a couple of points of differentiation here that I'm going to bring into my personal story, and then we'll just give some context kind of with my professional experience with my organization, who helps individuals navigate both of these issues. But what we've often found, and this was a complete surprise, meaning like we just followed the evidence here. We didn't go out with this hypothesis. But what never sat right with me, and I was diagnosed with 33 disabilities, like, you know, a ridiculous number of mental disorders. And what never sat right with me was like, well, I don't understand, because I have no issues with anything that I had to do operationally. Like, all I want to do is go back to that life, because I felt like that was my calling in life. So I was like, okay, I don't have any problems with what I'm being asked to do. I'm not trying to get out of duty or get out of a deployment or anything like that. Far from it. But yet here I am. And here's another thing, like, special operations is assessed and selected off of very rigid and for individuals who are like psychologically and physically resilient to the most extreme and difficult circumstances that we know of. So again, it was like, how could I deal with all of these things over time and do it well? And then all of a sudden I'm just falling apart. And I had a psychologist, I can't remember if it was a psychologist or psychiatrist, but through the Department of Defense. And he was like, well, think of it like this. It's like, you've done a number of operations, and you have, like, in your brain is a filing cabinet, and you have this filing system, and you are able to go through these operations, compartmentalize, put it in a file cabinet, close the door, continue on with life. Well, that sounded reasonable to me. And then he's like, well, what's happened now is, because you have so many files that the door can't close, and all these files are spewing out, and that is the psychological duress and distress that you're under now. And I was just like, that doesn't add up to me. And then I thought, like, hey man, like, I've been around a lot of explosions, low level, subconcussive, but nonetheless an explosion. Like, could there be any correlation with that affecting my brain in some way into what I'm experiencing and I'm having problems with in these psychological areas? And he was like, not that I know of. Like, it was thought, and it's currently thought, that the symptoms of a head injury, if they last longer than 6 months, for some reason, at that weird point in time, it becomes no longer associated with the physical injury. It now becomes associated with it being a psychological issue. So why that's important is that when we were able to properly assess the damage to my brain and to make a specific protocol to kind of go in there and treat those underlying conditions that were never discussed, through all my military travels in the medical domain, well, we were able to then not only like come back to where I was before I was my pre-injury status, I actually feel that I'm performing as good, if not better. So the point is that did I have all those psychological, diagnoses, or were they symptoms of something else? And in my experience, and I'm just talking about me here, is I had the symptoms of anxiety, of depression, of post-traumatic stress, and a number of other things, but they were really just symptoms of a physical injury, because you can follow that back to certain brain chemistry and certain parts of the brain that are affected, that are responsible for those things. So when those were corrected to me, we would turn off this process called neuroinflammation, or chronic neuroinflammation, and then make sure my brain and body was back in the right environment that was conducive to healing, regeneration, growth, neuroplasticity, things of that nature. Well, life started to get better, and all those psychological issues that I had resolved themselves without any, talk therapy or anything like that. And I'm not saying that that is the case for anybody else. This is just my personal experience. But fast forward into our work with the Warrior Angels Foundation, where we wanted to bring the same level of care to others, active duty service members and veterans who were suffering the symptoms of head injuries and post-traumatic stress. And what our work has shown is that oftentimes when people are struggling with the problems of post-traumatic stress, even though they say they've never had any physical injury, when we treat it as a physical injury, their symptoms of post-traumatic stress get turned down. So there is a correlation there, by saying, hey man, there is a role of inflammation. There's also a role of our unique biochemical individuality, our brain chemistry. If that is deficient or insufficient, that can wreak havoc downstream and cause and manifest as all these different things. So, those are some interesting things that we found there. So the encouraging thing here is for everybody is that if you seem to be, well, one, you're not your symptoms. You know what I mean? You're not your disorder. That's something that you're experiencing. All right. So, we get really easy to really get honed in on that and claim that as a new identity. My anxiety, my depression, my post-traumatic stress. Well, reclaim it as this is what I am experiencing. But the good thing is, hey, you could be suffering from massive chronic inflammation. You could be suffering from being deficient in things like this. And that could all stem from nutrition. So that's kind of the exciting hope there. And we'll have to come back to the question, David, but I wanted to give that context and that pretext to the audience, because I think this is like the incredible contributions that we're able to make, because this was not and still is not well understood. And a lot of these things are actually under our control if we are experiencing these symptoms that we don't want in our life. And this gives us actually the dominion, the ability to act as a sovereign individual over our life, to have agency over our life and say, you know what? I know I'm experiencing this, but there's things I can do about it. And maybe that's a behavioral change. Maybe that's a psychological change, but that's going back into it. And that being said, I remember what I wanted to come back to your question about, parenting. All right. So here's what we know. Children are a sponge. They're a sponge, especially years, from conception to 7 years. They're not, with their brainwave states, they're actually in a theta and a delta brainwave state, which is akin to being asleep, REM sleep, or deep sleep. So they're not even, what that means is they're not even have conscious control over their brain yet. So they're just taking information in without a filter, just coming in into the subconscious, and that gets hardwired into their central nervous system, that gets hardwired into the operating system. So irrespective of if a father has symptoms of post-traumatic stress, whatever behavior is exhibited around that child, through no fault of their own, will have that taken in. That is, now, once you understand that, that is eye-opening, eye-popping information. When I learned that, I said, dear God, everything we do, everything we think, not just talk, or most of it's nonverbal, gets downloaded right into the operating system of the child. So then at that point, you can make a decision, man. All right, man, is my life going to be a force for good around my children? Am I going to go the extra mile, even though I have to work really hard at it? And I'm a human. I fail every day. But it's this awareness says, okay, man, well, I just come back, and how can I do it better next time? And I think that's the beautiful part about life. So that to the question of, what are my thoughts on it and how can that play out? Well, imagine if you were plagued by that and you were just creating this absolutely toxic environment. It only makes sense that child, when they walk around you, are walking on eggshells, or they're afraid because they're going to get verbally berated, or they're even worse, physically assaulted. Who knows what? So of course that would get passed on. And back to the suicide with the guys, the reason that I really contemplated taking my own life had nothing to do with how I was personally dealing with it. It came to do with understanding the absolute devastating environment that I was creating inside my house. And I'm thinking, hey, the only best solution here is to remove myself permanently, because then maybe they will have a chance. And that, I think, with men specifically, is happening so much today. It's not that they're a coward in their reduced psychological state. They thought, and it's out of love, as crazy as that sounds, I have to remove myself from the situation. So, that is the difficulty with when somebody is not awake to this, and they become that you're going to be a victim, or you're going to be a victor. You can become a victim to this, and the next generations will default also. You'll set them up for failure. That's my 2 cents on it, David.
Man, you really touched so many bases with that. That was awesome, brother. I'm going to read you something real quick, Andy. Okay. It says that PTSD affects 8 million adults each year, and about 4% of men throughout their lifetimes. Okay. This is according to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. While it is unclear how many fathers struggle with PTSD, about half of all American men today are fathers. So it isn't far-fetched to assume that roughly 4 million dads may be dealing with issues you have gone through. Do you believe without significant interventions, these fathers are going to pass down that suffering to millions of kids if they don't find, like how you did, to go out there and be an advocate for themselves? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, again, when you understand how the brain operates, and if they're whatever their behavior is going to get downloaded into that child's operating system. So without some intervention, without actually acting under an understanding of, hey man, like I know I've heard it all my life, but everything I do matters, not just to me, but to everyone I interact with, and multiply or magnify that out to the largest degree. And that might be close to talking about where it goes with your children. So again, man, like if the individual is not educated on that, or they don't go through their own spiritual path where they come to that conclusion through, revelation or whatever it might be, then yes, it's difficult. And I think that, hey, there's dads out there thinking like, well, shit, man, like, God, I've set my kids up for success. Well, you know what? It can change. It can be rerouted all by you. You know what I mean? And you can replace what's been there with positive, more productive ways of being. So it's not beating ourselves up about what we didn't know. If you knew that was the case and you still continue to do it, well, that there's special places in hell for people like that. But if you didn't know, then you didn't know. And now, and you're changing your behavior, then that's all that you could ask of yourself. So I would tell the dads out there, man, let's not beat ourselves up for things that we didn't know. Let's take in new information. Let's figure out how we can make some changes, and let's get back on track. And let's start thinking about where do we want to be? What kind of father do I want to be? And then how would I need to change where I'm at today to meet that tomorrow best version of myself?
Yeah, it all falls back to that awareness and really just doing a self-assessment and what you want, putting your goals and basically just finding your purpose. Like you said, you found your purpose again with your children and being a better father and being a better husband. And I think that's where a lot of father fails, is they forget what their purpose is. You know what I mean? Especially when they identify with a job or career or stuff like that. With that being said, Andy, I going back to this article that I was reading about. Okay.
Yeah.
It talked about that parenting, we all know, is stressful. Okay. And it was going on to state that because of parenting, that these fathers who are experiencing PTSD, the effects, the stress that parenting brings upon them seem to really be magnified with fathers that have PTSD. Do you think that's, is that something you experienced or anything like that?
Yeah, I believe so. So let's
Uh-huh.
unpack that. So they're experiencing their symptoms, and then the symptoms of parenthood combined kind of contribute to like this bigger explosion, so to speak, emanating on the children. Yeah, 100%. Hey, man. Parenting is stressful. It's like, it's
Yeah.
kind of like combat. Like, you don't know, you have a general idea of what you think that might be, but until you step into those shoes, until that domain, like you don't really know what's going on. Parenting is no different, except the stress from parenting, man, 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
So, just attempting to navigate being a parent in today's day and age, we're making our kids walk around in masks everywhere, and they can't even see people's face anymore. Yeah, that's a stressful environment. Not even to throw into the equation, hey man, like I'm suffering and I'm bringing in all these things here. So I do think that is two compounding factors there that can make that situation a whole lot more.
Yeah. I was reading, Andy, about this one Marine. Okay. And I was talking to him and stuff like that. And he was talking about, because of his post-traumatic stress disorder, right? He was having issues being in public, and which led to him feeling very depressed because he would have to leave his daughter in the zoo. And I my heart went out for the guy, because here he is trying to be an engaged, committed, responsible father. And then he's having these issues that he can't deal with, for lack of better words, and he's leaving his daughter. And then I put myself in the child's shoes, and it's like, well, what does that convey? What kind of message does that convey to our children? She's probably thinking in her head, man, why did my daddy leave me? Why did he abandon me? Does he not love me? Does he not, is there something wrong with me? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's devastating. It's devastating for the child. It's devastating for the parent. I mean, the child and their limited capacity to understand, the complexity of the situation just goes to the lowest level. Like, dad, for some reason, he can't be around me. Therefore, there must be something inherent in me that causes one of the people that I love the most to not be able to be around me. So that just drops that, child's ability to be, confident and have good self-esteem, and doesn't have a clear understanding of the big picture. And again, the father's probably, I say we give them the benefit of the doubt. They're doing the best they can in a very difficult circumstance. And it's funny because where I'm at now, like we've had second or third generation of wars, and I'll have parents of my age or even older up into the 50s say, hey man, my father from World War II or the Korean War or the Vietnam War or even the first Gulf War, children of these fathers who engaged in those combat theaters would come back and say, I never understood until you guys framed traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, what my dad was dealing with And now I have a complete new understanding, and it rewrites their history.
Mhm.
As strange as that may sound, because they go back and now they understand what the father was dealing with through no fault of their own, and they didn't want to be this way. And it doesn't necessarily like just fix the past, but it does rewrite it in the sense that the individual now understands, like, oh my God, man, they were there was no medical care, this wasn't even talked about, but we've seen it since the dawn of war, and this is here, and these are the reasons they were having this problem. So that's one of the cool things, is that if it allows children who are now adults put that difficult circumstance or situation or their childhood with a pair of fresh eyes, a new perspective. And that new perspective says, okay, man, like, because they're, as an adult now, they're dealing with the difficulties of life, and they can think about it from an adult's perspective, from a parent's perspective. But going back to the child, that's the detrimental part of it. The heart, like you said, man, like, it breaks my heart too, because they can't comprehend that. They just want to be with their father, and God, it just tears me up. And it is, irrespective if they have a new perspective later on in life, it causes so much heartache in the family, and that ripples out negatively through the entire community.
Absolutely, bro. And it's safe to even say that, you know what I mean? If it's scary for the father, because, if they don't know what's really going on, I mean, it's definitely scary for the children. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The children don't understand what's happening, why it's happening. You know what I mean? And some of the worries they may have is, is their parent okay?
Yeah.
Or are they going to be able to take care of themselves? Are they going to be able to take care of me? With that being said, Andy, what are some of the steps you have taken to educate your children about what is happening to you, or what has happened to you?
Just attempting to talk to them and say, hey, daddy had an injury, or there was a problem with my brain because of my service, and that caused problems down the way that we experienced as 1, 2, 3. But now, because we wanted to get better, to create a better environment to improve our family, we went and found Dr. Gordon. We went, and now we help other people with that. So we turned it around into, like, making it very, hey, here's a cause which produced this effect. But there was this internal fire that we all have inside of us that said, hey, we're going to fight, and we're not going to accept this. And we're also able to turn that into a situation where we can go and help other people and other family members with it. So now, like, my kids, like, they're so proud of the Warrior Angels Foundation and taking care of the brain and things like that. Like, so, like, they wear it as a badge of a shield of honor type of thing. But we had to go back and we had to reframe it. You know what I mean? And the ones that we had after, well, they don't know any difference. They just know the secondhand story of it. And that's it. You got to go back and you got to identify, what do we want out of this? How do we frame it? How do we reframe it into and spin it into the positive direction that we want it to go? And then you have to walk the talk, man. And that's easier said than done. But if you're committed to it, you just stay on that path. And that's David, the way that, I made my best attempt to bring it back to them. Does it erase anything? Does it erase it from those memories? No, I don't think so. But they can see, as they are retrospective later on in life, a honest, like, and fair commitment on the path of the father to do their best to right things. And that's where that was my intent, man. That was my hope of where it would go.
It's good to see how you changed it. I mean, you learned about team building, all that stuff from being in sports, correct? And then later on, that was magnified with your team, your element on, being a green beanie, right? So with that being said, you transitioned what you learned to your family. You took them, you utilized your family instead of spearheading it off by yourself. And like a lot of fathers who are struggling with this, keeping their spouse in the dark about it or whatever, you know what I mean? Not really wanting to delve into it because of fear or whatever. You know what I mean? You took your family, you engaged all of them. You said, we're going to take this together. We're going to hit this on as a family. We're going to overcome it as a family, as one cohesive unit. And I think that's awesome. And that kind of leads into the next question I was going to ask you. What are the biggest mistakes fathers make that are hard to recover from? And an example would be like keeping their spouse in the dark about struggles and depression. You know what I mean? So, you know, I kind of like the way you framed that all, you know what I mean? And what you did, you know?
Yeah. We say the last part of the question, David, we talked about something with depression because it cut out for a second. I want to make sure I understand the whole context of the question so I can give my best answer.
Okay. So what are the biggest mistakes fathers make that are hard to recover from? Keeping spouse in the dark, about struggles and depression and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just give my experience. I don't know, like, you know, if this will be the key thing that they struggle to come back from, but I'll put it as like what I think is most important. And that is that the family unit remains cohesive. And so that means it needs to start with the husband and the wife. And as difficult as it is, you know, in a family life, to show affection, to show respect for the mom, the wife, to do your best in your own way for the family, to put that woman up on the pedestal and to let your children know that she's to be respected. I think first and foremost, that is of the utmost importance. And it's one thing to talk it, but it needs to be more visible. The children need to see that. They need to see that physical interaction. They need to see the love. They need to see the respect between, you know, those two. I think that's first and foremost of the utmost importance, because that's going to put into the child, you know, by their direct experience with it, a healthy representation of what a family needs to be like. Mm-hmm. What I think is other things that are difficult to come back from is if, you know, you're treating your wife in a way that you wouldn't want your children to treat their spouse in the future. That would be, so number one. And then number two, it's just understanding, hey, again, whether I think they see it or understand it or not, they're taking in that information. Mm-hmm. So how do we set up the way we live life? You know what I mean? Like for my family, like we have a family mission statement. We have, you know, our own version of like the 10 commandments, 7 things that you don't do, and everything else is, you know, open for discussion. But we don't do this. This family doesn't do this. And that allows us to hone in, and I can really, those are good teaching moments for me to take it at the child's lowest level, where they're, you know, my twins don't understand, they're 2.5, but my 6 and 7-year-old boys do, they do. And above that, they certainly do. And also they get to see, hey, does dad, is that just talk, or does he live his life that way? My hope is that when my children become older, they'll come back to these things that we said, hey, this is how we're going to navigate. And they'll see, hey, not only did dad talk it, he lived it. And he must have been really important to him to be this way for a reason. Let me reflect on that. You know, hopefully it's already, you know, become in the essence of who they are, but that's what I really hope that they'll find later on in life. So anything that would cause to be in the way, a block or a barrier for me personally to live that life, to provide that for my children, would be something very difficult to come back from. So I think that's it. Advocating for one type of behavior and then, you know, doing yourself something different than what you're advocating for. And we see this with our politicians all the time. Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, I think that's the same thing for us parents, man. That's going to be a hard one to come back on. So maybe that's something that we, you know, I can think of. I just thought about that while we're talking, David. And I think that's important, man. Like, do what you say you're going to do. And let them, you know, let them be a part of that. That will help, you know, for that to cement and magnify across time. So I think, yeah, if we're telling them to do one thing and we're acting personally a different way that's contrary to that is potentially disastrous.
Absolutely. Just sends a mixed message, and then they're going to grow up later on being like, okay, I'm confused. You know what I mean? But
yeah, are they gonna run for office?
Oh, right, exactly. Andy, I want to jump into some questions I got from the audience real quick, brother. And
yeah.
The first one I got is, do you think social media has a hand in making it difficult for men to seek help and express their struggles for fear of judgment?
I think it certainly could. It just depends on where the individual is coming from. Like if they're afraid to put that out there for help because they're honestly looking for help and they're not sure where to go, and that's a great forum to put that out there. But potentially, you could get trolls, you could get people that now think you're weak or who don't, we're all living busy lives. So they're going to pass judgment without really going and investigating the underlying story. So I would just go back to the individual. If you think that that's the best or a good medium for you to say, hey, I'm struggling and can anybody, provide some resources, or I just need some help, and that's your true authentic reason for putting that out there, then I do think potentially that could be a source used for good. Yeah. That being said, there's a lot of bad actors out there, so it could also be used for negative reasons. So it just kind of goes back to their intent, and you got to understand as the individual, hey, I'm going to get some good, I'm going to get some bad. I made the call that it was worth putting it out there, and go and investigate what you think is good. I think that could be a worthy vehicle if done in the right way, understanding that, hey, do I care what people think about me or not? Because who cares at the end of the day? But if that's a driving factor, that would certainly keep somebody from reaching out for help. If you were just worried about somebody's limited perspective of you having, a different judgment.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. The second one that came in was, how has your mission encountered resistance or judgment from the use of non-conventional treatments? The taboo nature associated with hormones.
Yeah, with fierce resistance from the medical high priests. We saw this with Dr. Gordon and I. This is the medical director for the Warrior Angels Foundation, and he runs the Millennium Health Neuroregeneration Centers. Brilliant neuropsychologist, one of my most favorite people on earth. But we were in the United Kingdom at the request of the Surgeon General of their armed forces, and we were at this invitation-only brain injury symposium where we're looking at these alternative treatment modalities, one of being the neuroendocrine approach that Dr. Gordon takes. And we're at the table with all of the decision makers over the entire NHS, that's National Healthcare System for the United Kingdom, and the vitriol and the closed-mindedness that I saw come from these individuals after Dr. Gordon Marr gave his presentation, which was just backed by like a mountain of evidence that he brought, for everybody to read. They just refused to take anything contrary to the belief system that they were proposing, that it just became, a moot point. So that's been the resistance, which will lead you down a whole different rabbit hole and another red pill there when you kind of understand the reasons why those things happen. But just ask, hey, has there been massive resistance from the machine? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially with all these, different approaches you're taking, and, like you called it, the machine, these pharmaceutical companies, big farm, Pfizer and all them, they definitely don't want your guys' messages going out there, because then it affects their business. It affects their pocket, And at the end of the day, it's all about the mighty money, the mighty dollar. With that being said, the last question we have coming in was, we have a saying in the line trade: be where your feet are. Your military career has the demands of deployments. How is your current mission distractions allowing for effective parenting?
I take the role now that I don't separate or segregate, as I integrate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like my family, they understand, and they're a part of the mission now. They've taken it on as something that we do now as a family, and so it's not like everybody knew I was doing a podcast today, and they knew why. You know what I mean? So that's how I brought them into the equation. And it's now something that, even though they're not doing all the things that I do, they're up to speed and they know the importance of it. and they're excited about it. So that's the best way that I brought it in, man, is to integrate it, because I have a full-time job. I have a big family. I run the foundation. We have an incredible team that I actively manage. And that means the majority of my weekend and several hours each day during the week is dedicated to that. But it's because we're able to balance all these things in proportion and have the complete backing of my family, because we all believe in what we're doing. It's been, I think, a more productive way for us, at least, to go about, with this demanding schedule.
I like that, especially because, there's a saying in the Bible that says, how could two walk together unless they be agreed? And, definitely when you have your house all in order, they're all on the same page with you. You know what I mean? It's definitely going to be a lot easier, especially knowing, like you said, you told your children today you have a podcast going on. So they respected that. They know that daddy's going to need some quiet time and stuff like that. And, that's really awesome that you did that, If you don't mind, Andy, I'd love for you to tell our listeners, what's a challenge you faced?
Well, David, I would.
Uh-huh. Go ahead, brother. What was that?
I just wanted to jump. I just want to jump in. I gotta throw this out there, because I just would be, I don't know what the right word is, lying to myself if I didn't, are really coming up short. Hey, the reason this whole thing goes, at least at the Marr house, is because of my wife.
Yes.
I have an incredible wife, and when I tried to say, hey, we need to go our separate ways, she wasn't having it. And she does everything. She just supports me 100%. I don't know how I got so fortunate. I'm not deserving of it, but I have a wife who we know now, like, whatever the situation, we're going to ride together. We're going to die together. That's just the way it goes. We worked hard to get here, but she just is so supportive. So, like that is like the biggest component of making all this work. Like, my wife is so supportive. She's behind it 100%. If I didn't have that level of support, I'm confident we wouldn't be having this conversation today. So I apologize for busting in, man, but I had to push that out there, because, men all out there that can relate know, as do you and I, like, you got to have that woman behind you. You got to have a unified front. Anything like you were talking about there with the biblical quote, it's got to be a unified front, and that's where magic can happen.
Absolutely, bro. And no, I'm glad you threw that in there, because, they say behind every successful man is a woman. Well, I like to take that a step further and say, well, she's not behind you. She's right next to you. You know what I mean? So that's awesome that you kicked in on that. Andy, can you tell our listeners what's a challenge you're facing, or, that you faced or still facing, that turned out to be a catalyst for growth as a man?
That's a great question. I think we'll just go back to us as men, and our sense of identity being tied around is by what we do professionally, or maybe even our self-worth coming from what we do, as a profession professionally. And that was, it took me losing that, and losing my health, losing a paycheck, not understanding, like, how am I going to I can't think straight. I can't walk straight. I can't earn a paycheck. I don't have a paycheck. How am I going to take care of this family? And I had to go inward to understand I'm not those things. Those are things that I did. And the underlying mechanism behind that really had to do with purpose. And then I realized, okay, well, what was the purpose behind being an athlete? What was really the purpose about what lined me up and fired me up of being about Special Forces? And it was serving a mission that was greater than myself, in a place where I could contribute and perform to the best of my abilities. And that's when I realized that's the driving factor in my life. And that opened up this whole new level of growth. That's hard to comprehend, because then I started to look for, okay, well, how do I live this life of purpose now, where I can contribute and can live my purpose? Out of these crucibles come these opportunities for new trajectories, new growths, graduating to new ways of being. And if you look throughout history, man, we have case after case after case after case. We always think and get caught up in our individual scenarios. But the fact of the matter is that, hey man, has somebody else endured the things that I've endured or I'm enduring, and have they been able to overcome that? The answer is always yes. And if that answer is yes for somebody else, then the answer is yes for you. We just have to first change our mindset, change the way we think about it. We might have to make a ton of behavioral changes. We might need medical help, but there is a fire in you that if you be quiet and listen, it will tell you that you need to go a certain way and you need to fight. And I guess that would be the biggest message here I can bring to the listeners is that, hey, like I said, out of these tough times, if you're open to it, it can produce a whole new way, a whole new life that you never even knew was out there, but it's yours for the making.
That is so awesome, Andy. Thank you, brother. I just want to wrap things up today with you, just being able to share with our audience how they can get a hold of you if they have any questions, your foundation and stuff like that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything One Stop Shop is our website. That's waftbi.org. All our social media, all our contact, any information you want on the foundation, any information you want on brain health, the science of head injuries, the science of post-traumatic stress, some of the products that our foundation is clinically validated. All that stuff is on our website. So you can get always reach me through there.
Well, thank you, Andy. I appreciate your time, brother. I know you got to get back to that beautiful family of yours. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to just be able to interview you, bro, and just share your story to our listeners. I know they're going to get a tremendous amount of value from it, brother. So I thank you and I commend you.
It was an absolute honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. Have a good one.